June 6, 1944. A date etched into history. But the story of D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted, began long before the first boots hit the beaches of Normandy. It started with a plan, a grand, audacious, and top-secret plan codenamed Operation Overlord. The task was monumental to breach Hitler's fortress Europe and open a new front against Nazi Germany. The weight of this responsibility fell on the shoulders of one man, American General Dwight D., appointed Supreme Allied Commander. He was tasked with orchestrating an unprecedented alliance of armies, navies, and air forces from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations. The planning was meticulous. Every detail, from tide charts and weather patterns to the number of bullets and rations each soldier would carry, was scrutinized. The Allies were gathering the mightiest invasion force the world had ever seen, and they had to get it right. There would be no second chances. But how do you hide an army of millions? You create a phantom one to ensure Overlord's success. The Allies needed to convince the Germans that the invasion would happen somewhere else. This led to one of the most brilliant deceptions in military history, Operation Fortitude. At its head was the famous American general George S. Patton, a commander the Germans respected and feared. The Allies created a completely fictional army group, the first U.S. Army Group, or Fusade, supposedly based in Kent, directly across from the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. This wasn't just a paper army. The Allies built a theatrical production of war. They deployed hundreds of inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and wooden aircraft to fool German reconnaissance planes. They generated a massive volume of fake radio traffic, creating the illusion of a massive force preparing to strike at Calais. Double agents, most notably a Spanish operative codenamed Garbo, fed a constant stream of convincing but false intelligence to the German High Command. The deception was so effective that even after the Normandy landings began, Hitler kept his best panzer divisions waiting at Calais, convinced D-Day was just a feint, a diversion from the real attack that was still to come. This phantom army would save thousands of real lives. While the Germans were looking the other way, the real armada was assembling in ports all along the southern coast of England. The sheer scale of it was almost unimaginable. Nearly 7,000 vessels of every shape and size, from massive battleships to tiny landing craft, formed a floating city stretching 4 miles. Above them, an air force of over 11,000 planes bombers, fighters, and transport aircraft was ready to dominate the skies. And then there were the men, 160,000 Allied soldiers, Americans, British, Canadians, and more were crammed onto the ships. They were young, many just teenagers, filled with a mix of fear, anxiety, and a grim determination. They checked their weapons, wrote last letters home, and waited. For months, they had trained for this single day. Now, as they crossed the choppy, unforgiving waters of the English Channel under the cover of darkness, they were heading toward a fortified coastline, toward an unknown fate, and toward their rendezvous with destiny. The invasion began not on the beaches, but from the sky. In the dark, cold hours before dawn on June 6th, the air was filled with the roar of engines, 24,000 Allied paratroopers, and glider-borne infantry from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, and the British 6th Airborne Division were dropped deep behind enemy lines. Their mission was crucial to sow chaos, destroy bridges, capture key crossroads, and secure the flanks of the invasion beaches before the main force landed. But the assault was fraught with peril. Intense anti-aircraft fire and poor weather scattered the formations across the Norman countryside. Paratroopers were dropped miles from their designated drop zones, often alone or in small, isolated groups. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their gear. Others landed directly on top of German position. It was chaotic, terrifying, and disorienting. Yet, despite the confusion, these elite soldiers improvised. Small bands of bros rallied together, using children's toy crickets as click-clack signals to find each other in the dark. Through sheer grit and courage, they fought fiercely to accomplish their objective, disrupting German communications and hampering their ability to reinforce the coast. They were the tip of the spear. As dawn broke, the naval guns of the Allied fleet unleashed a deafening and terrifying bombardment on the German coastal defenses. Then the ramps dropped. The D-Day landings were spread across 5 designated beaches, each with its own code name and its own story. To the west was Utah Beach. Thanks to the success of the airborne troops and a lucky navigational error that took the landing craft to a less defended section, American forces got ashore with relatively light casualties. They quickly pushed inland, linking up with the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne. But just a few miles east, at Omaha Beach, a different story unfolded. It was a scene of pure horror. Pre-landing bombardments had completely missed their targets, leaving the formidable German defenses intact. As the American soldiers of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions waded ashore, they were met with a murderous wall of machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire. Landing craft were ripped apart before they even reached the sand. The beach became a killing field, littered with the dead and wounded. For hours, the assault stalled, the men pinned down behind the few obstacles that offered any cover. It was here that the fate of D-Day hung by a thread. Only through incredible acts of individual bravery and small unit leadership did the Americans slowly, bloodily fight their way off the beach. Omaha would forever be known as Bloody Omaha. Further east, the British and Canadian forces landed at Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. At Gold, British troops faced stiff resistance, but managed to push through. At Juno, the Canadians fought their way through heavily defended seaside towns in some of the most intense fighting of the day. Advancing further inland than any other Allied unit, at Sword, British forces, along with French commandos, fought to secure the eastern flank, aiming to link up with the British airborne troops who had famously captured the Pegasus Bridge in a daring glider assault. By the end of that long, brutal day, the Allies had done it. They had clawed their way ashore and established a fragile foothold in Normandy. Operation Overlord was a success, but the cost was staggering. On D-Day alone, the Allies suffered over 10,000 casualties, with more than 4,000 confirmed dead. The beaches were secured, but the perimeter was thin, and the Germans were beginning to organize a powerful counterattack. The dead lay on the sands and in the fields, a heartbreaking testament to the price of freedom. The men who survived were exhausted, but their fight was far from over. The toehold was precarious, and everything now depended on their ability to hold the line, pour in reinforcements, and break out into the French countryside. The longest day had ended, but the battle for Normandy had just begun. D-Day was not the end. It was the beginning of the end. The initial landings gave way to a brutal 3-month slog through the hedgerows of Normandy. This wasn't open warfare. It was a grinder. The bocage, as the French call it, is a landscape of small fields separated by ancient, thick hedgerows and sunken lanes, creating a natural fortress perfect for defense. Every field became a separate, vicious battle. The Germans, especially the elite Waffen-SS divisions, fought with fanatic determination. Progress was measured in yards, not miles, and came at a horrific cost in human lives. Cities like Caen, which the Allies had hoped to capture on D-Day itself, became rubble-strewn battlegrounds that took over a month to secure. The fighting was close quarters, savage, but slowly, inexorably. The overwhelming Allied superiority in men and material began to tell. After weeks of brutal combat, the Allies finally achieved a breakout with Operation Cobra, smashing through the German lines. This led to the encirclement of the German 7th Army in what became known as the Falaise Pocket, a decisive victory that shattered the German forces in France and opened the road to Paris. So, what is the legacy of D-Day? It was, without question, the pivotal turning point of the war in Western Europe. It breached Fortress Europe, liberated France from 4 years of Nazi occupation, and forced Germany to fight a devastating war on 2 fronts, squeezed between the Allies in the West and the Soviet Union in the East. Less than a year after the landings in Normandy, the war in Europe would be over. But D-Day is more than a strategic victory. It stands as a powerful symbol of international cooperation, of different nations uniting against a common evil. And most of all, it is a testament to the courage and sacrifice of a generation. The young men who stormed those beaches, who dropped from the skies, who sailed that Steel Armada day, faced unimaginable terror for a cause greater than themselves. They fought not for conquest, but for liberation, not for glory, but for peace. We remember their bravery, we honor their sacrifice, and we must never forget the price they paid on the shores of Normandy. Thank you for watching. If you found this video meaningful, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more stories from history. See you next time.